Hello, everybody. It's Uncle Matt, and I'm here to read you another bedtime story. And tonight's story has to deal with Victoria Day weekend and artists and parades a little bit. It's the start of Victoria Day weekend, and in the pre-COVID world, we would attend parades, not to celebrate the city of Victoria, but Queen Victoria. And I found this book here that I'm going to read, not about the city of Victoria, but somebody that is a famous, or was a famous resident of Victoria. And that person is Emily Carr. So this book is called When Emily Carr Met Woo by Monica Culling and illustrated by Dean Griffiths. A little bit of history from Emily Carr. She was born December 13, 1871 in Victoria, BC, Canada, and died March 2nd, 1945 in Victoria, BC, Canada, age of 73. And she's probably most famous for her paintings, but she also did some writing as well. So she's well known around the world. All right, let's get into this story. This book was copyrighted in 2014. I like this book because if you've ever been to Victoria, you might recognize some scenes in the book here. Here we go. Folks in Victoria didn't understand Emily Carr's art. They thought the painter was a strange bird. She lived with all sorts of animals, dogs, cats, a parrot named Jane, and a rat named Susie. She walked around town pushing a baby stroller filled with puppies. One day, the strange bird went to the pet shop to buy birdseed. From behind a crate, a tiny face stared back at her. Emily's heart went out to the small creature. "Will you trade a puppy for that lonely monkey?" she asked. The small creature perched on Emily's shoulder as she walked home. A sea breeze ruffled by the monkey's fur. The air smelled of kelp and salt and far-away places. "Woo, woo, woo," she shrieked. "I will call you Woo," said Emily. Woo loved pranks. She pulled puppy tails, chased the cats, and grabbed Jane's feathers. Whenever she pulled out a plume, Woo whooped through the house. "Woo, woo, woo! Stop pestering Jane," Emily would shout, but teasing Jane was too much fun. Emily's sisters, Alice and Lizzy, lived nearby. When they first met Woo, the little monkey whisked Alice's hat off her head and pounced on Lizzie's shoulders. "Eek!" Lizzie shrieked. The cherries looked real, but they tasted awful. Woo spat them out. "This monkey can't stay," said Alice. "This monkey has to go," agreed Lizzie. But the sisters could see that Woo made Emily happy. Woo kept her treasures in an old candy tin. Anything that caught her eye, small pebbles, feathers, and shells, went into the tin. At night, Wu slept with her treasures close by. No one wanted to buy Emily's art. To make a living, she made and sold clay bowls and hooked rugs. She raised and sold puppies. Emily also rented rooms in her house on Simcoe Street. The painter longed to paint. It was all Emily had ever wanted to do, but now she was too busy. Emily bought a camper and called it the Elephant. It was tall and clumsy, but wonderful, just like an elephant. There was a place for everyone and everything. Besides all her painting supplies, there was room for the dog, Ginger Pop, as well as Susie, Woo, and a cat or two. Emily was planning another trip to the forest. The night before her trip, Emily started packing. Woo helped by touching everything. Suddenly, the little monkey took off. She had found a new treasure. Now I can pack in peace, thought Emily. Later, packing would be the last thing on her mind. Woo lay quietly on the floor. Her eyes were closed, and she whimpered. Yellow paint covered her mouth and paws. "Oh, Woo, what have you done?" sobbed Emily. Woo had eaten her treasure, a tube of yellow paint. The doctor came as quickly as he could. "This may help," he said. He gave Woo medicine to help her throw up. "We were going to the woods," said Emily sadly. "Woo loves it there." "Paint is extremely dangerous," said the doctor. "I'm afraid that your monkey may not make it." Emily cradled Woo in her arms all night. She gently stroked the monkey and watched the beating of her tiny heart. Emily prayed that somehow Woo would be strong enough to survive. In the morning, the dawn's light woke Emily from a troubled sleep. Woo's eyes were open too. The little monkey reached out her paw and softly murmured a tiny "woo." Emily took Woo's paw and smiled. Cedars touched the sky. They touched the painter's heart too. For Woo, the forest was just like the jungle, she remembered. Here, she felt free. Woo and the painter breathed in the fragrance of earth and moss and tree. They felt the peace hidden in the heart of the rainforest. The end. There's a little bit of a history of Emily Carr here, and maybe I'll read it to you. Emily Carr was born in Victoria, British Columbia in 1871, the same year the province became part of Canada. All her life, Emily was proud of the fact that she was the first in her family to be born a Canadian. Emily began drawing when she was 8. Later, she studied painting in San Francisco, England, and France. But away from home, Emily always became ill. She was homesick for the wild beauty of Canada's west coast. When Emily returned home for good, she decided to paint the decaying totem poles on western Vancouver Island, Haida Gwaii, and the Skeena and Nass rivers. She did not want those aspects of native culture to disappear into silent nothingness. Emily gained the trust and respect of the First Nations people of Iqaluit and they gave her the nickname Clewick, which means laughing one. For many years, few people understood Emily's work. She couldn't sell her paintings, and it was hard for her to make ends meet. So, in 1913, Emily built a house and rented rooms. She also bred and sold English sheepdogs and made and sold clay pottery. She did anything she could to make money. She even rented her own room and lived in a tent in her backyard. Then in 1927, Emily was invited to exhibit her work in the National Gallery in Ottawa, Canada. This was the beginning of her most creative time. Soon, Emily was making trips into the rainforest to paint its majestic beauty. When she could no longer paint, Emily began to write. Her first book, Clewick, won the country's greatest literary honor, the Governor General's Award. As she grew older, Emily Carr became ill and eventually could no longer care for her loved pets. Before she died in 1945, Emily sent Wu to live in Vancouver's Stanley Park Zoo. Wu and Emily Carr had been the best of friends for 15 years. Zoom in on this real picture here. Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for Uncle Matt's bedtime story. I hope you enjoyed that story, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.